Chapter 19, A Family Christmas. The holiday season came once again to the Townsend orphanage. Both Eliza Beth and Mary Sue were absent this year. Mary Sue graduated that spring. After graduating, she gained access to a trust fund her parents left for her in their will. It wasn't much, but she was able to attend Lawton Community College. Mary Sue sent regular letters to the orphanage children and cards for the holidays. For Thanksgiving, Vincent and Norman shared turkey carving duties, and Tanya led the children in giving thanks. Little Tom came to the home the first Saturday of December to handle stringing the Christmas lights. Tom, who previously made himself a stranger to the church, went on to become the most regular attendee. He managed to recruit 3 other church members to help him with the light project. The deacons kept themselves busy that year with many church and community projects over the holiday season. Many other members followed the example and found other ways to get involved around Townsend. The orphanage was just one among several groups who benefited from this turn of events. Pastor Stevens told Johnny, "Things are beginning to change for the better. Let's wait and see if it continues after the Christmas cheer begins to wear off." Johnny, Mary Beth, and Eliza Beth all came for the second annual Christmas lighting ceremony. They bought candy apples and hot spiced cider for all the children and Little Tom's crew. Pastor Stevens and his wife brought fresh homemade donuts, and Christine kept the hot chocolate flowing freely. After a day's hard work, the display was more spectacular than the prior year. The crew added a nativity scene made from lights. Eliza Beth's grandfather, Mr. Wilson, even helped by welding the frames for the figures and manger. Miss Johnson made no plans to continue making candy this year, but members of the church and community kept asking for them. Then the children begged her to do it because they wanted to help. So she finally had to give in. Eliza Beth managed to talk Mary Beth into attempting candy making as well, though on a much smaller scale, providing treats for the Stewart home and gifts for family members. It came time to begin the annual 12 Days of Christmas celebration. This year, the children bundled up and sang the songs in the middle of the brightly lit yard with Eliza Beth and other neighborhood children frequently participating. Neighbors began to realize it would be a regular occurrence, so the children found themselves putting on a nightly concert. The making of decorations began to wind down inside the home for lack of space. One child came up with the idea that they could keep making more if they gave them to neighbors as early gifts. Miss Johnson smiled to see all sorts of crafts from the orphanage hanging in the windows around the neighborhood. She thought, "We're finally beginning to function like a real community around here. I don't know how long I've waited to finally see it." Christmas Eve arrived with much fanfare. Christine delivered her gingerbread to the orphanage and the Stewart home by mid-morning. Johnny's family didn't have to be at Grandpa and Grandma Wilson's home until that night, so they spent the whole day at the orphanage. Eliza Beth helped with the last batch of crafts for gifts. Earlier, the children skipped Widow Jackson's because some of them were afraid of the widow. Eliza Beth hadn't been scared of the woman since she'd saved the day at the bridge, so she decided this batch would be for the good widow. Widow Jackson was quite surprised when she answered the door. She said, "Don't be a-standing out there in the cold and all. Please step into the front room." They expected to find the place stacked to the ceiling with guns, but not a single gun was in sight. Troy Allen scanned around the front room quite carefully. He saw a large cabinet in the corner that he decided must be a gun cabinet. He saw a similar cabinet in the dining room and figured there must be a gun cabinet in every room. Widow Jackson brought out some milk and cookies for the children to munch on as they helped her decorate her home with their crafts. She even took them upstairs to her cupola to hang their stained glass pictures in the high windows. Eliza noticed that the small room had a perfect view of the orphanage and the rocking chair faced that direction. There were marks on the floor where the rocking chair had been moved back and forth between 2 windows. Eliza wondered what there was to see out the other window. She stood up on her tiptoes and gazed around. The little girl was surprised that right in the middle, looking between all the other homes, she saw her own front door. From then on, Eliza Beth made a point to wave at the cupola whenever she came or went from her home. They returned to the orphanage as the sun was starting to set. Miss Johnson noticed that the neighbors were setting up rows of seats. The neighbors figured the night singing was going to be a particularly special event, or thought it ought to be. She followed this lead, and the children were dressed in their Sunday best. Mrs. Johnson also decided to have the children sing all 12 songs a day earlier than normal. Just after the concert, Johnny took his family to the Wilson home. They were celebrating their first Christmas together with their grandparents. The home was newly finished, but the construction was very simple and modest. There weren't many decorations except for a wreath on the door and a few homemade decorations like those in the orphanage. Mrs. Wilson turned out to be a wonderful cook, and they had a very nice ham dinner. Eliza Beth was the only child, so the conversation was more grown up and there was not much activity for her. Still, it was interesting. The Wilson family traditions seemed much more serious. After dinner, the grandfather read the Christmas story from the Bible, which was a long-standing tradition in their home. After Grandpa Wilson finished reading, he asked, "I want each of you to take a moment and think, what was the greatest gift you received this past year?" He went on to explain, "That question is one tradition my own grandfather started. I've been told it began the first year his family was freed from slavery." After they thought for a few moments, they began with the youngest. Eliza Beth was not sure what to say. All her first thoughts were all things that happened more recently, like the gifts she got at the home. Grandpa asked it in such a solemn manner that she knew they wanted a more serious answer. Johnny recounted where she started from a year earlier, and then she did some more thinking. "Well," Eliza Beth slowly started, "I guess the gift I'm most thankful for is for Johnny and how he's always been there for me. But that's not just this year, though. Is that okay?" Grandma Wilson chuckled and said, "That is fine, child. He was here for you this year also, wasn't he? Besides, this being your first year being asked, I think it is only fair you should include everything up till now." Then Eliza Beth added, "There is so much more, though. I'm thankful for Mary Beth and for a home and for grandparents and all that." Grandpa Wilson then added, "What a blessed year you've had then, dear Eliza. You won't get many more years like that, I'm afraid. I hope that you can take that." Mary Beth was next, and she said, "I feel just the same as Eliza. This has been such an incredible year. First there is Johnny and then Eliza Beth. Our home is very small, and yet it is so cozy. Yet I think the best gift I received this year has more to do with my parents. After the many years that Johnny has been my dearest friend, he still was an outsider to my world. It has been such a tremendous gift that my parents have finally accepted him. My life seems like it's all together now." At this response, Mr. Wilson looked to his wife and nodded in approval. Johnny also felt like there were too many gifts to determine the most important. Finally, he said, "Though it didn't exactly happen to me, I have to say it was Eliza Beth's rescue at the bridge. There are several people to thank for that. But it sounds like the biggest thanks needs to go to Widow Jackson. I say, she also came through at our wedding," looking to his wife. "Who would have been our witness without her? I'm changing my answer. It has to be Widow Jackson." "That's it, young man." Grandpa Wilson slapped him on the shoulder. "Now we're really getting to the point of the matter. Now what do you say, Clarabelle?" "You know I've never been as good at this as you," she said. But then she sighed and began. "Well, we thought our son's family died with him. When I saw Eliza Beth at our son's graveside, I have to say my heart was nearly in my throat. I think it was the most fitting place to meet her. It was almost symbolic of our son handing her over to our collective care. And knowing she survives, then, his family is still a part of us. It isn't just Eliza Beth I'm thankful for, but the manner in which she has returned to us." Mr. Wilson let out a low whistle. "I dare say you've gone and taken the wind right out of the answer I'd have given. To be sure, I'd say the same, but I don't want to repeat. I'll share my second greatest gift. That man, little Tom. Now, he might have had a hand in the tragedy at the beginning, but I dare say his absence alone would have hardly prevented it. From what you've all told me, the same couldn't be said about his part more recently. He was the turning point of that whole clan standoff, and he kept Eliza from becoming a hostage to that other pair. Not only is there one fewer enemy, but now a new ally as well. And isn't that something to be thankful for indeed?" Johnny was astounded and asked, "I'm not saying it isn't the right path to take, but I find it amazing that you feel that way. Little Tom was there when your son was lost in the fire. I don't understand how you can just forgive him so quickly." "Son, that brings us to another of my family traditions." Mr. Wilson looked rather grave. "And that is the eldest always bestows some wise advice on the group. I've never been comfortable with that role falling on my shoulders, and up to now I didn't have a clue what I'd say. Know this, bitterness is its own worst enemy. My father was a hard man, and I always said I'd never be like that. But when I was about your age, Johnny, I found I was getting to be just like him. One day my grandfather pulled me aside and criticized me for it. I asked him where it came from, and he said I'd become just as unforgiving as my father. The fruit of an unforgiving soul is bitterness of spirit. Learning to let go is freedom. Eliza Beth grew restless during all this talking, but stirred again as soon as her grandfather said, "Now we need to see about all these brightly wrapped packages we have piled here under the coat rack." Mr. and Mrs. Wilson each received a homemade gift from Eliza Beth and a store-bought gift from Johnny and Mary Beth. Eliza received 4 gifts. Each grandparent gave her 1 store-bought gift and 1 homemade gift. This was the first year she received Christmas presents from a store, which was exciting. The Stewart family spent Christmas Day with Mary Beth's parents, where all the gifts were store-bought. It was a nice time, but Eliza Beth preferred the orphanage. In their fancy home you heard, "Please don't touch that," or "This is only to be looked at." Everything seemed very proper and formal. The Jameson family decorated their home very grandly, and there were actually Christmas lights inside. Eliza saw her first Christmas tree. The orphanage never had one because they didn't have the space. Eliza Beth begged Johnny to put up a Christmas tree in their house, and the next year a tree became a staple in the Stewart home. Mary Beth remembered what she shared at the Wilsons' home and smiled as she watched the important people of her life, which once lived at odds with one another, singing, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. Eliza Beth's biggest present was a bicycle, which needed a little assembly. Johnny and Mr. Jameson worked together on this while Mary Beth's siblings played games with Eliza. Mary Beth and her mother were just watching. Mary Beth was smiling as a tear trickled down her cheek. Not a sad tear, but a happy one. Her mother noticed and wiped it away and asked, "What is it, darling?" "Mother," her voice trembled slightly, "this is the best Christmas ever. But I'm afraid this is going to make every Christmas after seem all the less grand." "Nonsense, dear," Mrs. Jameson consoled her. "They are all special in their own way, even if some do stand out. Besides, part of Christmas is the remembering of Christmases past." It came time for the Stewarts to head back to the orphanage, and Johnny found the entire Jameson family getting ready to accompany them. Their other children enjoyed visiting the home so much the year before that they persuaded their parents to come with them. Johnny watched as his father-in-law put a large bag in the trunk. Johnny thought to himself, "I get the feeling the children are going to get lots of surprises this year." Little did he know just how many surprises they were all going to have. When they arrived at the orphanage, the regular unwrapping ceremony was just ending, so Johnny and Mr. Jameson began to pass out their gifts. The children received store-bought gifts from Johnny and the Jameson parents, then homemade gifts from Mary Beth and the other Jameson children. There were so many gifts that they let the children open them at the same time. For several minutes, the only sound heard was tearing and ripping of wrapping paper, boxes, and packaging materials. Then came shouts of, "Joy, look at what I got!" and "I've never seen one of these before!" and "Wow, Timmy, that's cool!" and so many other things that you could hardly understand a word. The adults sat smiling and laughing, watching the eager and excited little faces. When they heard a knock at the front door, Miss Johnson looked at Johnny. She thought it might be another one of his surprises, but he just returned a blank look. They had no idea who it might be. Johnny went to the door with Miss Johnson following. It was little Tom and his family, his wife Jennifer and their 4-year-old daughter Maggie. The mountain carried a rather large package wrapped in plain brown paper. Eliza Beth came to greet him and introduced herself to his daughter. She took the package and opened it on the spot. It was a complete gardening set for little hands so that Eliza Beth could have her own tools when she helped little Tom around the yard. No sooner had little Tom given his gift to Eliza Beth when there was another knock at the door. This time it was Pastor Stevens. Though he was the only one at the door, they could see that he brought other people with him. The pastor brought a bag of gifts from the congregation. Though more practical things like underwear and clothing for the children, cooking utensils for the kitchen, and some new china for the dining room. The pastor gave Johnny a letter signed anonymous, but the pastor explained it was from the ex-Klansman. It informed Johnny about an education fund they started for Eliza Beth through the church. This would help her be able to go on to college after completing high school. Without this help, going on to college would have been difficult for her and her family. One of the people who came with Pastor Stevens was Deacon Jacob Barnes. The deacon brought his tractor with a couple of hay wagons attached. Miss Johnson looked curiously at Pastor Stevens. Pastor laughed and said, "There's no reason for this corner of Townsend to get all the fun. We want to take these singing children of yours caroling around town." Mrs. Johnson's eyes grew wide as she looked at the man. The matron of the home felt there'd already been more than enough surprises for one day and said, "Absolutely not. I doubt the children have the energy. It has been quite a remarkable day already." Mr. Jameson said, "Oh, it'll be fine. I'll tell you what, I can follow along with my car and take up any that get too tired." With this offer and much persuasion from the children, Miss Johnson eventually agreed. It was quite a troop going from home to home. Sometimes a person opened their door, took one look at Eliza, and closed the door on the group. They didn't let that discourage them, but simply moved on to the next house. They felt sorry for these people. What fun they were missing, and all for silly little notions about different people. At one home, the old woman who came to the door went to close it, but her husband reached around her and pushed the door back open. "Let them sing, Mama. Let them sing. I hear it's a good performance." The woman just looked in amazement at her husband. As they went along, the preschoolers ended up in the back of the Jameson car, as Miss Johnson had predicted. That didn't matter because several people joined the little traveling circus of carolers as they passed. As they circled around an empty lot, Johnny looked across and saw an old Ford panel truck following along just the other side of the lot. It was too dark to read the writing on the side, but he knew it said, "Honest Jeb Jackson's Guns and Tackle." Johnny pointed it out to Mary Beth and said, "Bless her heart if the old widow isn't out standing guard over Eliza. That little old woman has earned her rest, and yet she's still out looking after another."